Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Solomon. I hope you guys are all having a good Monday start to your week. All right, so I've got quite a bit to get into here. I found a podcast with Kosta Peric, who you will find out who Kosta Peric is here momentarily, but essentially ties to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ties to Mojaloop, which obviously deals with Ripple, deals with Coil, deals with Interledger, and Kosta also believe sitting on the board of Interledger as well. I'm going to run through a couple of things here because all of this ties back into this. Now, this is a written out, transcripted version of the podcast. But there's a lot to get through. To start with, Pakistan launching the country's first instant payment system for peer-to-peer transactions. This directly, it appears, ties into Mojaloop as well. This is called RAST. RAST is Pakistan's first instant payment system, enabling end-to-end payments for individuals, businesses, and government entities. Pakistan has the third largest unbanked adult population globally, with about 100 million adults without a bank account. It looks like this RAST platform is directly tying into the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Mojaloop, etc. Another one to get into here is this Tanzania one. Tanzania started with bilateral payment system where banks all settle transfers bilaterally, but it is currently in the process of switching to a centralized system. Tanzania Instant Payment System, or TIPS, is being developed independently utilizing open source Mojaloop code. So their entire instant payment system utilizing open source Mojaloop code. And initial testing of a few use cases is planned, etc., etc., etc. I believe this was 2021 when this came out. We can see here again Tanzania's instant payment system. Now, what's also interesting, and this is brought up in this podcast, I'm going to try to get through everything else and then get to this podcast. Africanenda, a new capacity building organization in Africa, also offers this type of support. This ties directly into Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ties into Mojaloop, etc., ties into the Rockefeller Group. And it's saying at the system level, so at the actual system level, tools like Mojaloop are focusing on easier, more self-service APIs to help simplify onboarding. You can see here, obviously, this goes back a long ways. Ripple and Coil with Mojaloop. Even more recently, Monetary Authority of Singapore, Ripple, Coil, Mojaloop, CBDC, etc., etc. They also go over this MOSIP. What MOSIP is essentially this digital ID system that they're trying to build out. Talking about multi-purpose foundational ID systems in which individuals receive a unique identifier from the government that they can use for identity assertion and verification. The foundational ID can then be used to access a wide variety of government and private services. This kind of all ties back into like some of these really old presentations. This is from W3. And basically W3C, operates the internet. But this is adoption strategy. It has Interledger protocol, which was invented by Ripple, gifted to the W3C, underpinning everything. I'm sure many of you guys have seen this. Then it deals in micropayments, digital assets, XRP, and Ethereum, blockchains such as Hyperledger Quilt, mobile money such as Mojaloop, banks, which they are referring to Ripple as a bank within this, central bank, Bank of England, etc., etc. Kosta Peric, as we talked about. Now, what's interesting about Kosta, this dude literally was found integral in building out the foundation of what we know as SWIFT today and the SWIFT system today. Spent 23 years and 5 months directly moving after that to the Interledger Foundation, Mojaloop, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Still currently with all three, obviously. Bill and Melinda Gates, Mojaloop, Interledger as well. This is an old post from Hodor, actually. This is Kosta basically just saying, great minds in harmony today with Coil, Just Moon, Adrian Hope Bale, thinking about the Internet of Payments. We'll get there with patience, perseverance, and passion. And he was also, he was the author of, The Castle and Sandbox, a book on how to innovate in conservative companies, former head of Swift's innovation group, etc., etc., specifically heading up aspects of Mojaloop now. This is Africanenda that we talked about previously. You can see their partners down here below, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, and funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, what you'll recognize in this podcast transcript that we're about to get into here is that it seems like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it seems like Mojaloop, seems like Interledger are tied into the World Bank as well for G2P, which is essentially government to person payments. And they're stating, even within this transcript here, this is from the World Bank site, that, basically COVID had accelerated the need for government to person payments, et cetera, et cetera. You can think whatever you want to think about that. So, all right, I'm going to get into this because I don't know if a lot of people have seen this. This came out in May of this year. This is a Barefoot Innovation podcast with Kosta Peric, Deputy Director of Financial Services for the Poor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's some interesting information in here, and I think it's valuable enough to share with you all. So you can see right here, he's the chairman of the board of the Mojaloop Foundation and a board member of the Interledger Foundation. And I'm going to try to get through this as best as I possibly can here. There's 14 pages. We'll just kind of go through it here. To give you a bit of a background, about 8.5 years ago, Kosta left Swift. Notably, he was the chief architect of the Swift network, which is the current version of Swift's technology. He also created innovation at Swift that is called InnoTribe, and fostered innovation in the financial industry around Swift, notably with a big focus on technology startups and that initiative. Many of the shows at Sabos, et cetera, et cetera. Then he gets into the Gates Foundation here. Digital payment technology, interbank transactions, et cetera. This gets into where he grows up. Now this gets into Africanenda. So he's talking about traveling, and then he goes into, say, if you don't go on the ground, which is what he did. He traveled. He took most of the team to a couple of different nations where they stayed, almost 2 weeks to visit a number of stakeholders. And it's talking about helped by an organization called Africanenda that it looks like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation helped to create, which is composed of a number of experts in Africa. And we talked about the Rockefeller Foundation as well. Big sweep of financial inclusion over the past 10 to 15 years, etc. This is kind of giving the use cases for banking the unbanked in here. I read through this earlier today. The goal today is to foster the next wave of innovation because 400 million African adults are still unbanked. We need to accelerate this movement, etc., etc. The notion of instant payment platforms or faster payment platforms. Now it talks about a great example at a national scale, deploying programs at a national scale, would be the RAST platform that is now operational, that connects pretty much all the players, digital and traditional. The next effort for the RAST platform is to drive volume on the platform because these platforms need to be self-sustainable and they need volume to grow, etc., etc., etc. Now he's talking about KYC. Apologize. I mean, this is a lot to get through. I read through this whole thing earlier today, but there's a ton in here. Let me just read through here real quick. Yeah, they help to create these platforms with philanthropic capital, donations, nonprofit type aspects. And once they get them to the point that they need to be, they're, AKA self-sustainable. He's talking about 3 ways that they help. That would be the first way is kind of bootstrapping. The second way is technical assistance. And then the third way is essentially open source software. Now, notably, the Mojaloop Foundation is the name of the instant payment reference implementation in open source. So the Mojaloop Foundation is there to host the solution. And now it looks like this solution is for literally infrastructure. With Tanzania, it talks about it literally kind of underpinning infrastructure, moving to this new system. The other is called MOSIP, the Digital Identity Foundational Open Source Solution, hosted by the Institute of Technology of Bangalore. These two solutions, so Mojaloop and MOSIP, are there to essentially allow countries who are not necessarily as equipped with the skills and resources as other countries to benefit from the same technology and solutions. So it's banking the unbanked. He gets very much so into interoperability as well. So quite perhaps not typical for a philanthropic organization to facilitate all of this, but it's very important. It removes a lot of barriers, etc. It's talking about community around open source organizations as well. The community is meeting actually physically in Tanzania, etc., etc. Tanzania to create a country platform that is based on the Mojaloop code. So Tanzania's countrywide platform will be based on Mojaloop. Typically, the country stakeholders desire to develop this solution themselves, but they sometimes require some help, and that's where the community can step in and provide various kinds of services. It kind of gives this analogy of a can of tomato paste, interoperability, etc., etc. Let me read through here. The work of the now this is the interviewer, Gates Foundation, as to how you create an ecosystem shift, because you're talking about interoperable systems. They have to work in both the public and private sectors. They have to work between companies. How do you get people to undertake a project of creating a payment system on a new code foundation like this? He's saying that we're not computers, we're people. It's very important to understand what drives a strategic intent and drives a particular set of stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. The challenge is to explain how, by interoperating with your competitors, how that helps you. And in a nutshell, it helps because it grows the market. And we have seen that over and over again. He saw that at Swift, et cetera, et cetera. All right, let me keep going through here. It's more than just payments interoperability. It's also interoperability of the agents of cash in and out. When you do a mobile money operation, it's very important to have cash in, cash out points, which are not ATMs, which are not bank branches, which are typically mom and pop shops in markets and elsewhere where you go with cash, and the owner of the shop can credit your wallet with the equivalent amount or vice versa. And so interoperability, this means interoperability in some cases of these agents, and that's a precious asset. And so going through the analysis with stakeholders and showing them with examples from elsewhere is what helps. If you talk to governments, we didn't need much help to explain the pandemic did that for us, because the pandemic has shown very, very clearly how beneficial it is to have a digital delivery platform for the support and various forms of aid to people in the pandemic. And so the pandemic has accelerated tremendously the interest in governments to digitize the mechanisms that they have for so-called government-to-person payments, et cetera, et cetera. Gender gap, close to my heart. Innovation on top of these platforms. So building innovation on top of these platforms, like a platform like Mojaloop, et cetera, and I have to keep going back to kind of the old school adoption strategy right here, where you pretty much have everything being interoperable, right? ILP underpins it all. So he's talking about interoperability or building innovation on top of platforms like Mojaloop with new forms of applications and services that will benefit the poor. And by benefiting the poor, you actually have to understand how they live, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're talking about micropayments here very much so. Let me move forward a little bit. Paint the landscape. He's talking about where we're at as far as kind of this interoperability standpoint. And Kosta says, so I would say when you have this curve of innovation from Gartner or others, and some of you guys may have seen that, the Gartner hype cycle or the Gartner adoption curve rate, that image always floats across on Twitter, etc. You have the first invention, and then you have the hype, and then you have the fold because of a lot of problems. And then everything moves slowly to scale. I think we are now leveling off after the original creation of mobile money and success. They know the innovation work has been refined. Interoperability is now kicking in. And now we're seeing that scaling is just beginning. And that's where he basically thinks that we are, etc. Let me go down a little bit. Interesting chart from the World Bank, even though the World Bank has a resource about faster payment systems. And you can see they also have an inventory of instant or faster payment platforms around the world. You can see that the curve of growth on these types of systems is following pretty much 20 years ago the curve of growth of real-time gross settlements. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting, et cetera, et cetera. Let me see here. Difficulty trusting open source tools. Solutions. Demystify. He gets into NFTs. Let's talk a little bit. You touched on the fact that MOSIP is working on the identity issues. We talked about that identity platform, right? Let's talk about the role of digital identity and the progress that you're driving and what the solutions are there. He's talking about one of the key barriers to financial inclusion is that people who we strive to help and connect to a financial system typically have no required documents for a traditional bank account. They don't have an address because they live in a slum maybe. They may not know their birth date because there is no paper trail, their affiliation. So the only way in many cases for the village elder to say, yes, I know the person and he's from this village, but that's not enough, right? It's talking about India to an extent with biometric identification, fingerprints, or iris scans. They managed to enroll in excess of 1 billion people into their Aadhaar system. He basically goes in to say that Mojaloop and what they're doing has Aadhaar portions, but it's not fully Aadhaar, and there's arguments for and against it. Foundation of the ID platform, from Mojaloop's standpoint, is to respect increasing privacy concerns, okay, privacy requirements, etc., etc. Let me see down here. Talking about women and digital identity. Talking about wholesale CBDCs, retail CBDCs, cross-border payments. Between instant payment platforms. Certainly a point to the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the Bank for International Settlements as kind of leaders in this thinking. The Monetary Authority of Singapore is advising the Mojaloop Foundation, and the Mojaloop Foundation is creating a center of expertise in Singapore for wholesale central bank digital currencies in support of financial inclusion. I think that's the one that we've seen Ripple tie into recently. So hugely important on the wholesale things. Talking about the retail aspect as well. Offline transactions could be massively valuable. Let me run through this. Talking about NFTs. Trying to just get through this for you guys. Talking about creating a sandbox. Take people out of the castle and give them a different environment with different incentives, sometimes different technology, different processes. Let people do it their way and then observe what happens. If it's a success, you can try to bring it back to the castle. Or the castle can follow what's in the sandbox, etc., etc. Talking about Liechtenstein. Remember before the pandemic. All right, now he's talking about this Rast platform again that just went live. The country's first instant payment system for peer-to-peer transactions, which is Rast. And he goes in to say, oh, hold on. I mentioned the project in Pakistan, the platform that's called Rast, that is now operational. I vividly remember the meeting I had. This must have been in 2015. I was in Islamabad, and I was given 15 minutes to see the governor of the central bank, the State Bank of Pakistan back then, to tell him about financial inclusion. Kosta had 15 minutes for a pitch. In the 15 minutes, you have the 5 minutes of chit-chat, the glad to see you, etc. So basically 10 minutes to actually showcase how financial inclusion was important, etc. I guess he showed him one slide. Never went into slides with these meetings, etc. And the governor of the central bank essentially stated, this is very interesting. We need to follow up on this. Kosta was fully expecting him to take a quick look and gently send him away. That is not what occurred. And now looking where we're at currently, the platform is now operational. The usage has, but now the usage has using the platform. These 15 minutes were great success. So, like we said before, it looks like that Rast platform is certainly underpinned at a very bare minimum by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but it makes sense. I'm assuming that they're using Mojaloop aspects as well. How many more millions of people's lives, etc. So that's a methodology we use. Is called Level 1 Project. So there's a website called level1project.org. Mojaloop, the link is mojaloop.io. Mosip is mosip.io. The World Bank site, I will send you. I don't remember by heart. That would be a good start. I think that's already quite another reading, etc. I know it's a lot to get through, guys. I tried highlighting key points within this. I know there's a ton in here. Interesting that the government to person payments type stuff. I mean, you can make your own assumptions about where that goes in the future. We certainly know the past couple of years have drastically increased digitization from a government standpoint, from a banking standpoint, from a payments and financial infrastructure standpoint. I was not aware that the Pakistan's Rast platform looks like it's underpinned by, like I said, I mean, it's got to be Mojaloop, I'm assuming. But Tanzania as well. I mean, this is a country platform. This isn't just this this isn't just, some sort of whatever type thing. I mean, it's literally a countrywide platform. And you get into this guy's history here, basically building out the infrastructure for Swift as we know it today. And then you get into Interledger protocol, where he sits on the board and pretty much sits as the chair at Mojaloop. And I know these older documents are frustrating to look at sometimes because everything's so slow in this space. But you can really start to see how everything ties in from an interoperability standpoint. And yeah, shout out to Hoder. Dude did some research back in the day, was a monster, obviously. Africanenda with the Rockefeller Foundation. The Government to Payments Initiative tied in with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, literally with the World Bank. It'll be interesting to watch how all this plays out. This was a little bit of a longer video. I thought it was valuable to present to you guys. I'll share this link for everybody because, I mean, to get through this, reading through 14 pages here in interview format, I was trying to pick and choose, what made sense to share with you guys. But you guys can read this for yourselves as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll talk to you when I talk to you. Thank you. Bye.